This was the state of affairs when Payne arrived in Philadelphia in search of work. He approached a publisher with some manuscripts he'd written and was offered a job writing articles for the Pennsylvania magazine. This was when it became clear that Payne bore huge resentment towards the injustices he'd seen and could articulate this with great effect. He wrote later,
"When the country in which I'd set foot began to stir, I knew now was the time to act."
One of his articles was aimed at Christians who defended slavery. Soon after he'd started his writing job, the Battle of Lexington took place when British troops fired on an American crowd assembled to protest against the new taxes and killed 8 of them. And that's when he wrote the pamphlet Common Sense. It put the case for independence from Britain. It was against monarchy and for a democratic republic with annual elections, and it was full of phrases like,
"Nature disapproves the hereditary right of kings. Otherwise she would not so frequently ridicule it by giving mankind an ass for a lion."
George III, he said, was only king by being a descendant of William the Conqueror, who was a
French bastard landing with an armed banditti and establishing himself King of England against the consent of the natives.
something for everyone there. Even a royalist cabbie would go,
"Mind you, he's got a point about the frogs."
and he also wrote that the king was a
Sottish, stupid, stubborn, worthless, brutish man who resembles a common murderer, a highwayman or a housebreaker.
Clearly, he wasn't attacking the British, he was attacking the system of Britain. Whereas up until then, the demand of the colonies was mostly for a higher status within the empire. It's as if the attitude to George III was, well, maybe if I do everything George tells me, eventually he might let me have a little tiny bit of influence. The effect of Payne's book even reached George Washington, who didn't support independence until persuaded to by Payne. And coupled with this, you know, he had wooden teeth. But it wasn't just the pamphlet's radicalism that astonished people, it was the style. No one had written about politics for common people before. Political writing had always come in huge, expensive volumes, full of Latin and Greek. To most people, politics was meant to be unintelligible. It was like the shipping forecast. So Payne's pamphlet was like hearing,
"And here is the shipping forecast at 1604 GMT.
Blimey, there's a storm brewing up over Finisterre. I'd keep well away from there if I was you.
Within 6 months, 150,440 copies of Common Sense had been sold, and the total population was only 3 million, which at the time made it the biggest-selling book in America ever. Publishers printed thousands of bootleg copies, knowing they were guaranteed to sell them.
Come on, £5.
Payne was so concerned at getting out as many copies as possible, he didn't bother with copyright and didn't make any money from the book, not even enough to pay the printers. A few months later, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, inspired by the corset maker from Thetford. After the Declaration, the British Army attacked and captured the garrison at Fort Washington, and Payne joined the retreating American forces. But one soldier said he was
A good philosopher, but not a soldier. He always kept well out of danger.
But Payne continued to write inspiring articles in a journal called The American Crisis. His first, written in December 1776, just as the Americans appeared to be defeated, was the one that began,
"These are the times that try men's souls. Tyranny like hell is not easily conquered. Yet the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph." Read that back to me, will you, Jones?
These are the times
which was read to troops as they went into battle.
like hell.
Payne was rewarded by being made Secretary for Foreign Affairs. He was enormously flattered, as you would be. For a while he went to live at Washington's country residence, and then Washington accepted Payne's invitation to
Spend a part of an evening at my apartment and eat a crust of bread and cheese.
That's cool, isn't it? Imagine the panic most people would be in if George Washington was coming round to dinner. Oh my God, do you think he likes fish? What are we going to do for pudding? He's bound to tell us if he doesn't like the starter, as he cannot tell a lie. But Payne's just gone, "There you are, crust of bread and cheese. I've got the King of France coming round tomorrow, he's getting a bowl of sugar puffs." But there was a tension between Payne and the other leaders. In 1780, Payne drafted a plan to tax the wealthy to help fund the army, which unsurprisingly the wealthy weren't too keen on. But there was something else. For Payne, the War of Independence was a battle for the high ideals of democracy, whereas for many of the American leaders, once they got Britain off their backs, they were more interested in just retaining their own position and protecting the status quo. Payne's radicalism had been useful to them for inspiring the troops, but once Britain had surrendered, it was just a nuisance.